everybody, welcome to The World This Week. Greeks deeply divided heading into historic referendum. Iran nuclear talks in endgame. Iranian foreign minister is optimistic. Hispanic leaders tell the Republican Party to stand up to Donald Trump. And it's 4th of July. These are some of the issues we'll touch upon this Sunday. I'm joined this Sunday by Alon Pinkas, former advisor to Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and I-24 News editor Charles Biblizer. Hello, gentlemen. Alon, let's start with ISIS. What is going on? Egypt, Tunisia, 30 British citizens are dead. What's going on? Every day another beheading, another mass execution. Where's the world?
The world is divided into nation states. And nation states have militaries and intelligence agencies, and they cross information. No one was ever prepared. No one ever shaped a doctrine to combat something like ISIS. It's trans-border, it's trans-state, it's non-state, call it what you want. It pops up when you least expect it. Everyone thought it's an Iraq, it's a Levant thing, as the name suggests. Then they pop up in Tunisia, then in the Sinai, then in Yemen. Then next thing you'll know, you will see ISIS activity in Iran, which is their #1 nemesis and enemy right now.
So what to do?
Declare war. I know it sounds like a bumper sticker, but you need to declare war and push this to the #1 slot, bar none, on your priority list, and say, okay, we will commit the money, the resources, the intelligence, the sharing, and the ground troops if necessary. Because if ISIS is, as former Prime Minister and former Chief of Staff Ehud Barak says, something that if we put our minds to it, we could destroy in 2 weeks, I would be more cautious than declare. But assuming he knows more than I about capabilities and military operations, then let's do it.
Charles, the Americans look helpless. Now the Europeans as well, the British as well.
Well, I was going to say that in order to declare war, you'd need American support, and you'd need American leadership for this to happen. They're already conducting U.S.-led airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. This is eventually probably going to have to happen also in Afghanistan and Libya as ISIS gains a greater and greater foothold in those regions as well. Here, the major concern now is the Sinai, with the attacks against Egyptian military assets this week. Israel had to close the border. This is a major threat on the southern border, which has been quiet since basically '79. Not something Israel wants to see happen.
So we have to have at least a few minutes about Donald Trump, Charles. What's going on in this campaign over there? Yeah.
The Donald is polling very well, but besides the polls, it's a disaster zone behind the scenes.
Of course, it's not only Mexico, it's not only China, Hispanics, it's Macy's, it's NBC,
Univision,
it's even NASCAR.
The city of New York, mind you, and you know if the city of New York is on Donald's behind, considering the property taxes that he pays to that city, you know that there's an issue there. Nevertheless, he's polling very, very well on the national level, right behind Jeb Bush, but he's also polling very well at the grassroots level, and that's really what we have to look out for at this stage. He's polling well in early primary states. I don't think people will ultimately be able to get past his cartoonish character. He's not presidential. I don't see him really winning the nomination, but he's going to cause a stir, and he's gonna put people on the spot, and that's going to be interesting to watch.
So far, a great gift to the Democratic Party.
It's the best thing that's happened to them in a long, long time. Although they've had a very good month, the Democratic Party, with Obama in the White House, with his major victories.
Right, and Hillary without even saying much at all. But what does this tell you about the American electorate, the Republican electorate?
Well, you know, there are two things to say about this. The first is, I understand why Republicans find Donald Trump attractive. Because for a certain period of time, for a limited period of time, he's saying everything they want to say. He is the anti-political correctness. He's the anti-establishment. He doesn't mince words. He doesn't talk about complicated and complex policy issues. He just says it as he feels. And many Republicans identify with what he said. I agree with Charles. Even those Republicans do not think of him as presidential material. They just think he's there to shape the discourse, and then Jeb Bush or someone else, or Scott Walker or John Kasich from Ohio, which I would urge you to pay attention to.
Really?
He has not announced yet. Apparently, he's scheduled to announce July 21st. He's the governor of Ohio, a former TV anchor and commentator like you. But he's a very, very serious man.
Charles, briefly, is Trump going to embarrass the other candidates?
To a certain degree, the party has already disowned him, or the institutionalized party has already disowned him. You had Mitt Romney the other day, yesterday actually, on CNN, whose father is Mexican born, saying this is not a Republican. To a degree,
you had Cruz supporting him.
That's the other issue. I mean, in every single primary, you have these guys, these conservatives who come out ahead at the beginning, like Herman Cain, Ted Cruz, Huckabee as well. The Texas Rick Perry last race as well. They generally fall by the wayside. Generally, the Republicans have shifted towards a more moderate candidate.
Well, wait and see. Charles Alon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now the Greek tragedy. We are joined from Athens by Tom Dunn, a senior international editor of Huffington Post. Thank you very much for joining us, Tom, in Athens.
Thank you so much.
Now, as Greeks are going to the polls, what's on their minds? Politics, personal concerns, their ego against the rest of Europe? How would you put it?
There's a lot of concerns and a lot of panic. The media here is blowing things out of proportion, and a lot of interest. People from both sides are creating this feeling of doomsday around here. We've seen politicians from the right creating rumors about lack of basic medicine and basic food supplies. And to be honest, I have to say there's no lack of medicine, and there are no bare feet children running around the streets with bloated bellies and flies on their face. Everything is fine. And then on the left, you have Tsipras and his government creating rumors about how they're going to leave completely and basically desert the Greek people if and when they vote yes in the referendum. In terms of what public opinion is, there have been a myriad of polls in the past few days, none of which gives any type of clear answer. We've had a couple of polls that show a slight advantage to yes in the Greek vote, a few polls that show a slight advantage to no. All of them are within the statistical margin of error, and so there's really no way of knowing what will happen tonight.
So, meanwhile, on the streets of Athens, do you see more despair, or you see more people sipping coffees in coffee shops?
Definitely not coffee shops. People are very stressed. It reminds me a lot of how Israel was during the Intifada. It's 5 years of constant panic and terror. And you see people constantly worried. People are feeling that maybe all of their life savings tomorrow will turn into a pile of monopoly money, or drachma, if you'd like. And there's a lot of stress about that.
Tom Dunn in Athens, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
A deadly attack inspired by ISIS in Tunisia left 38 people dead, among them 30 British citizens. We speak now with Dr. Afzal Ashraf, an expert on terrorism, who joins us from London. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Well, 38 people died. I didn't see huge world coverage, frankly. There was much more about Greece. Are we getting used to terrorist attacks?
Well, I think there is an interesting dimension, not so much getting used to it, but how different nations react to terrorism attacks, and how the world reacts to attacks in different countries. In Tunisia, 30 British people died out of 38. This government decided to react in a particular way, which wasn't too sensational as far as TV coverage and news coverage was concerned, but did result in a 2-minute silence yesterday here at 12 o'clock. And we've seen a far fewer number of people in Paris in January in the Charlie Hebdo affair die, resulting in world leaders arriving in Paris to commemorate that event. Of course, in Iraq, Afghanistan, in West Africa, in East Africa, more than 30 people are dying almost on a daily basis, and sometimes hundreds of people are dying, and very little coverage takes place. So it's very interesting how the story hits the world media at certain times.
British authorities participate in the investigation, but there's little doubt that ISIS is behind it. What's going to be, do you think, the reaction against ISIS from British government?
Well, the British government has already said that it's going to have a full spectrum response. Now, exactly what it means by that is open to debate, but generally it means using soft measures such as counter narratives, making extremist ideas less accessible to people, taking action against extremists, marginalizing them. But also, there is now a debate which started on Friday in the House of Commons about using air power in Syria. The argument being put forward by the government is, well, we already have a parliamentary approval to use air power against Daesh in Iraq, so why can't we use air power against Daesh in Syria? And of course that throws up many questions about how effective that would be, bearing in mind that air power is already being used by coalition forces, and of course how effectively any advantage can be exploited with the absence of reliable, regular ground forces to exploit the advantages of air power. So the debate has begun.
Dr. Ashraf, I thank you very much for joining us. Thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Well, ISIS is also waging a war on Egypt in the Sinai desert this week. Let's go to Cairo. Joining us is Jacob Wichafter, a freelance journalist. Thank you very much for joining us from Cairo.
It's good to be with you, Jaco.
How would you describe the situation right now in Cairo after the murder of the Attorney General, after the massive attack in Sinai, and the retaliation in Cairo?
So here's the situation. You have a government that's very eager to provide to the public a sense of security and stability. And at the same time, they're trying to mobilize the population in what's obviously going to be a long-term struggle against the Muslim Brotherhood. So what does that look like on the ground? Well, just a couple of blocks from here is the Tahrir Square metro station, the Sadat station. It was closed in the days following the assassination of the Attorney General. Why? Because they thought there might be pro-Muslim Brotherhood demonstrators showing up in the square. Well, several days have gone by. There have been no demonstrations in the square, and the subway station's been reopened, and people can change their trains. That gives a sense of stability and security to the average person in Cairo. And we also have to admit that there's a cluster of folks here that are supportive of the Ikhwan, of the Brotherhood. And there have been demonstrations in different suburbs of Cairo that are in support of the Brotherhood. And the police have turned out to quash those demonstrations, and there has been violence. So it's a mixed picture.
President Assisi vowed to execute the Muslim Brotherhood leaders who were sentenced to death. This is surely not going to go quietly there.
The Egyptian state is not known for its subtlety in the use of force. And from F-16s over Sheikh Zayed to massive detentions to what's now being called targeted killing by some, the regime here is going to go after its enemies, and it's going to go after them hard. There are elements in Egyptian society, there are Egyptian liberals and NGOs, human rights organizations that are very critical of the escalation of violence on the part of the state. They think it's a bad pathway for a country that needs some kind of reconciliation. And yet, on the other hand, you've got a constituency of folks here who actually think that Sisi has not been hardline enough. And you see that a lot on the TV talk shows here, where hosts are saying, look, man, you've been in office for 2 years now, and we still have terrorism. What are you doing about it? And so I believe that the crackdown is going to continue. And yes, you're right, Yaakov, it's going to escalate.
Yeah, well, is there a growing sympathy between ISIS and the extreme Muslims in Egypt, namely the Brotherhood?
Everybody wants to tie their enemies together. So, for instance, the Israelis want to tie Hamas together with Islamic State. And here in Egypt, the government wants together the Muslim Brotherhood with Islamic State. We just don't know how deep the connections run between these different organizations. But we do know this: the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIL have very different programmatic ends. I mean, the Islamic State wants an Islamic caliphate that extends across the entire Muslim world, and the Muslim Brotherhood wants to have a Egypt that's run along Egyptian Muslim Sunni lines that are much more conservative and modest than what ISIL is proposing. So while there may be some cooperation between the Brotherhood, some elements of it, and Hamas and some elements with it, with Islamic State, I'm just not sure I share the assessment of folks like General Yoav Mordechai, who are saying there's a direct tie between all these organizations.
Jacob Whitshifter in Cairo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this has been The World This Week. We'll see you here next Sunday. Have a great week.